Chapter 1 The Mysterious Gift. The day began like any other in London. A grey sky with the promise of rain, the distant hum of carriages and voices from the street. But for Hercule Poirot, it was to be anything but ordinary. The Belgian detective sat at his desk, his small room at the Savoy Hotel impeccably organised. Each object was in its rightful place, each book aligned at precisely the correct angle. Poirot's thoughts were interrupted by the soft knock on the door. "Entrez," he called, his voice sharp yet polite. The door opened and Hastings stepped in, holding a small parcel wrapped in crimson paper. "A visitor, mon ami," Hastings said, holding it out. "I found this at the front desk. It appears to be for you." Poirot raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "A gift, you say? How curious! But no card, no indication of who it could be from." Hastings shrugged. It was simply left there. No name, no explanation. Poirot took the parcel from Hastings and inspected it carefully. It was small, but its weight suggested something delicate inside. Carefully, he untied the ribbon, peeling back the paper to reveal a velvet-lined box. Inside, nestled on a bed of soft dark velvet, was a red silk cravat, a deep, rich shade of crimson, as if it had been dipped in the colour of passion itself. It was exquisitely made, each stitch perfect, with an intricate pattern embroidered along the edges. Poirot picked it up, his fingers brushing the soft silk. He noticed a small curious tag sewn into the fabric. It read only, "For the one who knows the truth." "Mon Dieu," Poirot muttered under his breath. "This is no ordinary cravat, Hastings. It is a message, a clue. But to what?" Hastings, looking puzzled, leaned in to examine the cravat. "But who would send such a thing? And what is it supposed to mean?" Poirot turned the cravat over in his hands, deep in thought. "There is no card, no address. Whoever sent this wants us to figure out its significance. The question is, why the cravat? And why now?" Hastings glanced around the room. "Perhaps it's related to one of your old cases." "Poirot?" Poirot nodded slowly, but his expression remained pensive. "It could be, or perhaps it is a new case entirely, one that has yet to reveal itself. But I do not believe in coincidence, Hastings. Someone is sending me a message. It is up to us to decipher it." Just as Poirot was about to speak again, there came another knock at the door, this time more urgent. "Entrez!" Poirot called once more. The door opened, and a man in his late 30s stepped inside. His dark hair was slicked back neatly, his eyes tense with worry. He was dressed impeccably in a dark suit, but his air of unease was evident. "Ah, monsieur," Poirot said, standing. "Please, come in. You have the look of someone who is in need of assistance." The man hesitated, glancing briefly at the cravat in Poirot's hands. I'm afraid I am in a great deal of trouble, Monsieur Poirot. My name is William Reynolds. I need your help. I believe someone is trying to ruin me." Poirot gestured for the man to sit. "You are in the right place, monsieur. Tell me what troubles you." Reynolds sat down, his fingers trembling as he clasped them together. "It all started 2 weeks ago, when I received a package in the mail, exactly like the one you hold in your hands, except the cravat was blue. At first I thought it was a joke, but since then strange things have begun to happen. People are watching me. I've noticed unfamiliar faces following me in the streets, and I hear whispers whenever I enter my office." Poirot listened intently, his sharp mind already beginning to piece together the fragments of the puzzle. "You have received more than one cravat, then?" Reynolds nodded, his voice low and strained. "Yes. I tried to ignore it, but the tension has been building. I feel as though someone is playing a game with me, a dangerous game, and I fear it is a game I cannot win alone." Poirot's eyes narrowed as he leaned forward. "Tell me, monsieur, what do you do for a living? What is your profession?" "I am a businessman, Monsieur Poirot. I deal in fine fabrics, silks, velvets, the finest materials available. My clients are wealthy, influential people. I have always conducted my business with integrity. Tell me more about the blue cravat," Poirot said, his fingers still tracing the red silk. "What did it look like?" Reynolds swallowed hard. "It was identical in every way to the one you now hold, Monsieur Poirot. The same craftsmanship, the same quality, only the colour was different." Poirot's eyes gleamed with interest. "And have you noticed any connection between these cravats and your clients? Perhaps a link between the colour and the people who would choose them?" Reynolds shook his head. "I cannot see the connection, but the cravat was a gift from one of my most important clients, Lord Pembroke. He is a man of considerable power in society, and he is one of the few people I have shown these cravats to. But since receiving the blue one, I felt threatened. I cannot explain it, but something about it unsettles me." Poirot stood and paced around the room, his mind racing. "Lord Pembroke, you say? This is a name that requires closer inspection, Hastings. We must learn more about this man, his connections, and what he may be hiding." Reynolds seemed to relax slightly, though his anxiety was still palpable. "I beg of you, Monsieur Poirot, please. If you can find out what is happening, I would be eternally grateful. I do not know who I can trust any more." Poirot nodded and placed the red silk cravat carefully back in its box. "You have come to the right person, monsieur. But be assured, this mystery will be solved. There is always a reason behind such actions, and no matter how hidden the truth may seem, it will come to light." With that, Poirot turned to Hastings, his eyes sharp and full of purpose. "We must meet Lord Pembroke, and we must do so without delay." As Poirot and Hastings left the room, the mystery of the red silk cravat had only just begun, but already Poirot's mind was working through the details, unravelling the threads that would soon weave the fabric of a truth far more complicated than anyone could have imagined. Chapter 2. The shadows of Lord Pembroke the next morning. To the Kaiatsu, sun was shining brightly, casting a golden glow over London, though Poirot remained as cool and composed as ever. After a brief breakfast at the Savoy, the detective and Captain Hastings set off to investigate Lord Pembroke, a man whose name was as well known in society as it was whispered behind closed doors. The address Poirot had been given was an elegant townhouse located just off Piccadilly. It was the kind of house that radiated old money and discretion. 3 stories of Georgian perfection, with a polished brass door-knocker and windows that had seen generations of the same family pass through them. When Poirot and Hastings arrived, the butler, an elderly man with a face like a piece of carved granite, greeted them with a polite but non-committal nod. "Lord Pembroke is expecting you?" the butler asked, his tone neutral. "We are here on urgent business," Poirot said, his French accent crisp and commanding. "It is in regards to a most peculiar matter, involving a certain gift that was sent recently to Mr. William Reynolds." The butler's eyes flickered with a brief but unmistakable sign of recognition. "Ah, yes. Mr. Reynolds, please, wait here. I shall inform his lordship that you have arrived." The man disappeared behind a heavy door, and Poirot and Hastings were left in a rather sterile sitting-room, furnished in a style that could only be described as too perfect. Everything placed with precision, as though a museum exhibit rather than a lived-in space. "It is a rare thing to be invited into the home of one so influential," Hastings remarked, taking a seat on one of the plush armchairs. "I wonder what kind of man Lord Pembroke truly is." Poirot's lips curled into a slight smile. "A man of wealth, Hastings. But wealth does not always equate to power. It is the hidden things, the things that others cannot see, that give a person real control." Before Hastings could respond, the butler returned, this time accompanied by Lord Pembroke himself. The man who entered the room was tall, with sharp features and piercing grey eyes. His suit was impeccably tailored, the finest fabrics, but it was the faint air of authority about him that truly stood out. He did not enter as a guest, he entered as the owner of the space. "Ah, Monsieur Poirot, Captain Hastings," Lord Pembroke said smoothly, his voice deep and controlled. "I have heard much about you both. It is rare for anyone to seek an audience with me. I trust this is not a social call?" Poirot gave a polite nod, his hands folded in front of him. "No, monsieur, it is not a social call. Rather, I find myself intrigued by a certain gift, a red silk cravat, which I understand you have recently given to Mr. William Reynolds." Pembroke's expression did not change, but Poirot noticed the slightest flicker of surprise in his eyes. Just enough for Poirot to catch it. "I see," Lord Pembroke replied. "Mr. Reynolds is a valued client of mine. He came to me for some personal advice. I thought a gift would be a gesture of goodwill. It seems that I have unwittingly caused some distress. You are aware, I trust, of the second cravat, the blue one, that was sent to Mr. Reynolds?" Poirot pressed, his tone sharp but not accusatory. Lord Pembroke's eyes narrowed just slightly. "I was not aware there was a second cravat. I sent him only the red one. It was, as I said, a gift, nothing more." "And the note?" Poirot continued, his voice now cool and deliberate. "The words sewn into the cravat, for the one who knows the truth. You do not find that curious, monsieur?" Pembroke's gaze shifted ever so slightly, and Poirot caught it. A barely perceptible moment of discomfort. "I cannot speak to the meaning behind any message someone may choose to embroider into a garment, Monsieur Poirot. I assure you, I have no part in any hidden messages." Poirot's sharp eyes never left the man. He could sense the lie, small though it was, lingering in Lord Pembroke's words. "I see," Poirot said slowly, rising from his chair. "But I must insist, monsieur, that we look deeper into this matter. Mr. Reynolds is under the belief that he is being followed. He fears for his safety. And the cravat, as I have come to believe, is a piece in a larger puzzle." Lord Pembroke rose as well, his demeanour unchanging. "You are welcome to investigate as you see fit, Monsieur Poirot. However, I assure you, I am in no way involved in whatever misfortune Mr. Reynolds may be experiencing. But I would ask you not to trouble me with these matters further." Poirot's eyes flicked toward the tall windows that overlooked the London skyline. There was something about Pembroke's cool detachment that did not sit well with him. The man's manner suggested an attempt at control, a careful orchestration of his surroundings. But was it a facade? "I appreciate your time, monsieur," Poirot said, his voice softer but still firm. "But I am not someone who leaves questions unanswered. I will be back." Once outside the house, Poirot and Hastings walked briskly along the cobblestone streets. Hastings was the first to speak. "Well, Poirot, what do you think?" He didn't seem to be hiding anything. At least nothing obvious. Poirot's eyes were distant as he thought. "That is the problem, Hastings. He is hiding something. Lord Pembroke has the air of a man who is always in control. But everyone has a secret. Every man who seeks to wield power has something they would rather remain in the shadows." Hastings raised an eyebrow. "You think he's involved in this somehow?" Poirot smiled wryly. "I do not know, but I suspect the truth lies hidden beneath his polished exterior. We must learn more about him, his history, his business dealings, and most importantly, we must understand why he chose to send Mr. Reynolds that cravat." Hastings sighed. "It's always the quiet ones, isn't it?" Poirot gave him a quick glance. "The quiet ones, Hastings, are often the loudest when they speak through their actions." The investigation had only just begun, and already Poirot was piecing together a web of intrigue. The cravat was no ordinary accessory. It was a message, a key to understanding something far darker than a mere gift. Poirot could feel it in his bones, and he knew that the next steps would bring them closer to uncovering a mystery that stretched far beyond fabric and threads. As Poirot and Hastings walked away from Lord Pembroke's townhouse, the detective's mind raced. He had learned more in that short meeting than Lord Pembroke could ever realize. But the question remained, what was the truth hidden behind the red silk cravat? Chapter 3. The Web of Deception. The morning after their visit to Lord Pembroke's townhouse, Hercule Poirot was deep in thought, pacing the small confines of his hotel room. The red silk cravat lay on his desk, still neatly folded within the velvet box, as though waiting for him to unravel the mystery hidden within its soft folds. But Poirot's mind, ever analytical, had already begun to assemble pieces of the puzzle. But despite his best efforts, there was something elusive, something just out of reach, like a word on the tip of his tongue that refused to be spoken. Hastings entered the room, a briefcase in hand, his brow furrowed as he glanced at his friend. "Poirot, you look as if you're about to crack the case wide open. Have you learned something new?" Poirot paused, giving Hastings a sharp glance. "I have not cracked it yet, mon ami, but I feel we are on the right path. The cravat, the second cravat, they are connected, yes, but they are more than mere gifts. They are symbols." Hastings raised an eyebrow. "Symbols? Symbols of what?" Poirot tapped his fingers against the desk, as if considering the question. "There is power in symbols, Hastings. They carry meaning that transcends the physical. The cravat, a mere article of clothing, has been used to send a message. But to whom and for what purpose?" Hastings shook his head. "You've lost me, Poirot. What could a cravat symbolize?" Poirot's lips curled into a small smile. A cravat may seem insignificant, but its meaning depends on its context. It is often worn by men of stature, men of influence. But what happens when you take such a symbol and turn it into a message? What happens when you send it to a man who is unaware of its true significance? Hastings was silent for a moment, then nodded slowly. I think I understand. The cravat isn't just a gift, is it? It's something more. A clue, a piece of the puzzle. Precisely, Poirot replied, his eyes gleaming with determination. But the question remains, why Mr. Reynolds? Why send him not one, but 2 cravats? And why does Lord Pembroke seem so evasive? Hastings leaned forward. You don't trust him, do you? Poirot's gaze sharpened. Trust is a rare commodity, Hastings. Lord Pembroke is a man of secrets. He may not be directly involved in whatever scheme is unfolding, but I am certain he knows more than he is letting on. We need to dig deeper into his past. Where do we begin? Hastings asked. Poirot's eyes twinkled with that familiar gleam of intrigue. We begin with Lord Pembroke's business dealings. The cravat was a gift tied to a transaction of some kind, and I am certain there is more to it than simple generosity. Mr. Reynolds may be only a pawn in a much larger game. The detective turned to his desk, opening a drawer filled with various papers. I have made a few inquiries into Pembroke's financial activities, but I have yet to uncover anything truly revealing. Today, we shall visit some of his business associates, those who may know something about him that he prefers to remain hidden. The 2 men set off in search of Lord Pembroke's associates. They had no time to waste, and Poirot's mind was already racing ahead to the next step in the investigation. They made their way to a private club in St. James's, where they had learned that one of Pembroke's closest associates, a man named Charles Haverstock, frequently spent his afternoons. The club was a place of refinement and exclusivity. Its dark wood panelling and rich velvet furnishings lending an air of old-world sophistication. As they entered, they were greeted by a doorman who looked them over before allowing them inside. The atmosphere was quiet, with only a few patrons scattered about, sipping brandy and engaged in low conversation. Poirot's sharp eyes scanned the room until they settled on a tall man in a grey suit sitting at a corner table, his fingers tapping rhythmically against the polished surface of his glass. His face was long and lean, his eyes sharp beneath a carefully groomed brow. This, Poirot knew, was Charles Haverstock. The detective and Hastings made their way toward the table, and Haverstock looked up with a slight frown. He was not expecting company, but Poirot's presence seemed to put him at ease. "Monsieur Haverstock?" Poirot asked, his voice warm but authoritative. "I am Hercule Poirot, and this is my associate, Captain Hastings. We are investigating a matter concerning Lord Pembroke. I trust you can spare a few moments of your time?" Haverstock regarded Poirot coolly, his eyes studying the detective with a mixture of curiosity and suspicion. "Lord Pembroke," he repeated, his voice low. "I am not certain why a man of your reputation would concern himself with him. Pembroke is a businessman, nothing more." Poirot smiled, his eyes glinting with that signature intensity. "Businessman? Yes, but not just any businessman, monsieur. He is a man with influence, and with influence comes the ability to affect more than just commerce. We are interested in learning about his dealings, his private dealings." Haverstock set his drink down and leaned back in his chair, his fingers steepled together. "I see," he said slowly. I can't say that I know anything particularly unusual about Pembroke's business affairs. But I suppose you could say that he does have some rather unorthodox interests. The man is obsessed with power, always looking for ways to expand his reach, his influence." Poirot leaned forward, intrigued. "What sort of interests, monsieur?" Haverstock hesitated, then glanced around as if ensuring no one was listening. "He's involved in some rather questionable investments, expensive pieces of art, rare antiques, and, how should I say it, items of a more esoteric nature. It's not something he talks about openly, but he is always on the lookout for rare, highly coveted things. Things that are worth more than money." Poirot's interest piqued. "What kinds of things?" Haverstock shifted uncomfortably. "I don't know the specifics, but I've heard whispers. Pembroke is not just a businessman, you see. He's a collector of power, and power, like rare art, is often best appreciated in the dark." Poirot sat back, digesting the information. "So you suggest that Lord Pembroke's interests go beyond the realm of ordinary business?" "Exactly," Haverstock confirmed. "I don't know all the details, but I'm sure you can imagine how these kinds of pursuits can sometimes attract the wrong kind of attention." Poirot stood up, his mind already racing. "Thank you, monsieur. Your insight has been most helpful." Hastings and Poirot exchanged a glance as they made their way to the door. Once outside, Poirot's mind was already working through the implications of Haverstock's words. "Power," Poirot muttered to himself. "Lord Pembroke is not just after wealth. He seeks influence, the kind of influence that cannot be easily measured in pounds or shillings." "And the cravat?" Hastings asked, his brow furrowed. "Where does that fit into all of this?" Poirot's lips curled into a wry smile. "Ah, mon ami, the cravat is the key. It is not merely a gift, it is a symbol of power. Lord Pembroke is sending a message. But to whom?" As Poirot and Hastings walked down the street, the mystery was growing more complex by the hour. The threads of deception were weaving themselves into a pattern that would soon reveal the truth. But for now, Hercule Poirot knew one thing for certain. The red silk cravat was not just a piece of clothing, it was a map that would lead of them to the heart of a conspiracy. Chapter 4. The Auction at Midnight. The mystery was deepening, and Hercule Poirot could feel the tension in the air thickening with every passing hour. Each new discovery brought more questions than answers, and though the red silk cravat remained at the centre of the enigma, it was clear to Poirot that this was not a simple case of a gift gone wrong. No, it was something far more intricate, a web of deceit, power, and influence stretching across the very fabric of high society. Poirot had spent the previous evening going through his notes and reviewing the conversations he had had with Lord Pembroke and Charles Haverstock. As he pored over the details, one fact stood out more clearly than the rest: Lord Pembroke's obsession with rare and powerful objects. It was a fixation, almost an addiction, to accumulate things of immense value, objects with hidden meanings, the sort of items that spoke more to a person's desire for control than for mere possession. But what was it about these rare items that connected to the red cravat? What was Pembroke's ultimate game? The detective could sense that the cravat itself was a link in a chain that would soon lead them to something much larger, something more dangerous. Poirot had an inkling of where the next piece of the puzzle might lie. A lead had emerged through Haverstock's casual mention of a secret auction. An auction held at midnight, a gathering of society's elite, where rare and sometimes illicit items were traded in the shadows. This, Poirot suspected, was where Lord Pembroke might be finding his collectibles. "I do not like it, Poirot," Captain Hastings said, a note of concern in his voice as they prepared to leave their hotel. "An auction at midnight? Sounds unusual, dangerous even." Poirot gave his companion a reassuring smile. "Ah, but that is where the truth is often found, Hastings. Not in the light of day, where everyone's motives are clear, but in the shadows, where people must hide what they truly seek." The two men made their way to the location, a small, discreet building tucked away in an alley just off Fleet Street. The address was known only to a select few, and entry was by invitation only. The place was unmarked, the exterior nondescript, and even the door appeared to be part of the building's wall, its presence only evident to those who knew to look for it. Upon arrival, Poirot and Hastings were greeted by a man with a bowler hat and a silk scarf wrapped loosely around his neck. The man looked them over quickly, then nodded curtly. "Invitation?" he asked in a low voice. Poirot produced a small card that had been handed to him earlier by Haverstock. It was simple, black with gold lettering that read, "Midnight Auction, by invitation only." The man inspected the card for a moment, then stepped aside. "Enter," he said, motioning for them to follow. Inside, the atmosphere was nothing like the grandeur of most auctions. The room was dimly lit, with only a few chandeliers casting a soft golden glow over the proceedings. A small crowd of well-dressed individuals stood scattered throughout the room, whispering to one another in hushed tones. There was no loud bidding or spectacle here, only quiet, careful transactions. As Poirot and Hastings moved further into the room, Poirot's keen eyes scanned the gathering. He saw men and women whose names he recognized from society's upper echelons, financiers, politicians, and aristocrats, all cloaked in mystery, all with secrets to hide. At the far end of the room, a man with a cane stood on a raised platform, overseeing the auction. He had the air of someone who was accustomed to handling rare and expensive objects with the utmost care. His name, Poirot knew, was Horace Dawes, an infamous auctioneer with a reputation for dealing in items of dubious origin. Poirot and Hastings made their way toward a table where several objects had been placed for inspection. There were antique watches, paintings, and various other trinkets that seemed to have been plucked from different eras and cultures. But Poirot was not interested in the mundane. His eyes were focused on a single small object, a delicate silver box with intricate engravings resting on a velvet cushion. It was the kind of thing that would attract the attention of someone like Lord Pembroke, a collector of powerful symbols. Poirot leaned in closer, his gloved fingers tracing the fine lines of the engraving. It was a design he had seen before, on the back of the cravat. "This box," Poirot murmured to Hastings, his voice low. "It is connected to Pembroke's collection. This is not just a box, it is part of a greater set. Hastings glanced at the object, his eyes widening. A set? What do you mean? Poirot's gaze never wavered from the box. Each item in Pembroke's collection tells a story. They are not merely possessions. They are keys to unlocking his ambitions. This box is one such key. Just then, the auctioneer, Dawes, stepped forward and raised his hand, signalling the beginning of the auction. The crowd fell silent, waiting for the bidding to commence. "Ladies and gentlemen," Dawes began, his voice smooth and practiced, "we begin tonight's auction with a rare item indeed, a piece of exquisite craftsmanship, said to be from the Idiom du lost collection of an ancient dynasty. It is a symbol of power, one that has been coveted for centuries." He gestured toward the silver box, which was now placed in the centre of the table. "I present to you the first lot of the evening. This magnificent box of unknown origin is a work of art. But more than that, it is a symbol of influence. Let the bidding begin." The crowd murmured in agreement, and the bidding began in earnest. Poirot could sense the tension in the air as the price for the box climbed higher and higher. It was clear that someone in the room was very eager to obtain it. Perhaps someone who already owned the other pieces in the set. Poirot's eyes narrowed as the bidding reached its peak. £5,000, a voice called out from the back of the room. It was Lord Pembroke's voice, unmistakable even in the hushed atmosphere. Poirot's heart skipped a beat. Lord Pembroke was here in the shadows, playing his hand at ding. Detective did not need to look around the room to know that the man's presence was not just about acquiring rare artifacts. It was about securing something far more valuable. Control. But Poirot had not come to this auction merely to observe. He had come to disrupt Lord Pembroke's plans. As the bidding escalated, Poirot made his move. He stepped forward, his presence commanding the room's attention, even as the auctioneer began to close in on the final price. £10,000, Poirot said, his voice cutting through the air like a knife. The room fell silent. All eyes turned toward him. Lord Pembroke, visibly taken aback, shot a glare in Poirot's direction. For a moment there was a tense standoff, the two men locking, eyes across the room. Then Lord Pembroke spoke, his voice laced with an edge of irritation. "You must be joking, Poirot," he said, his tone dripping with disdain. "You have no interest in this box." Poirot's smile was cool, yet full of meaning. "Ah, monsieur, you underestimate me. I am interested in everything that happens in this room. You, more than anyone, should understand that." The auctioneer cleared his throat, sensing the tension, and quickly brought the bidding to a close. £10,000, then. Sold. As the crowd slowly dispersed, Poirot and Hastings made their way toward the exit. The weight of the evenings, events settling over them. Poirot had been playing his own game, a game where the stakes were higher than anyone in that room could understand. "Poirot," Hastings said, his voice low. "What now? Pembroke will be furious." Poirot's eyes glinted with satisfaction. "Now, mon ami, we see how far Lord Pembroke is willing to go to protect his collection and to protect his secrets." The game had just begun, and Hercule Poirot was determined to uncover the truth, no matter the cost. Chapter 5. The Hand Behind the Curtain. The following days passed in a blur of activity as Poirot and Hastings continued their investigation. The auction at midnight had been a pivotal moment, but it had not revealed as much as the detective had hoped. Despite the heavy bidding for the silver box, Lord Pembroke had not made any further moves of interest, and the cravat, still missing, remained the key to the entire mystery. Poirot could not shake the feeling that he was being watched. It was subtle, a presence just out of reach, but it was unmistakable. The more he learned about Pembroke's activities, the more convinced he became that the wealthy aristocrat was not the sole mastermind behind this affair. Someone was pulling the strings from behind the scenes, someone far more dangerous and elusive. It was late in the afternoon when Poirot received an unexpected visitor. A knock on the door of his hotel room interrupted his quiet reflection. Hastings, who had been flipping through a newspaper, looked up in surprise. "Who could that be?" he asked, rising to answer the door. When Hastings opened it, a woman stood in the doorway. She was tall and slender, with dark hair neatly tied in a chignon. Her eyes were sharp, though there was a wariness in her expression that suggested she was not here to chat about the weather. She was well dressed, her black gown flowing elegantly to the floor, and though she was obviously of high rank, there was a certain urgency about her. Poirot's eyes narrowed as he looked up at her, his gaze immediately assessing her posture and the tension in her demeanour. "Mademoiselle, may I assist you?" he asked politely. The woman hesitated for only a moment before speaking. "Monsieur Poirot, I presume." "You are correct, madame. I am Hercule Poirot. Please, come in." She stepped inside, her heels clicking on the marble floor, and took a seat before Poirot gestured for her to do so. She appeared to be in her early 30s, but her eyes carried the weight of someone who had seen far too much. Her lips parted as though she were about to speak, but then she seemed to reconsider, glancing at Hastings, who remained by the door. "Is your associate trustworthy, Monsieur Poirot?" she asked. Poirot glanced at Hastings. "This is Captain Hastings, my most trusted friend and confidant. If you have something to share, madame, you may speak freely before him." The woman studied Hastings carefully, her eyes scrutinizing him, before nodding. "Very well, Monsieur Poirot. I have come to you because I believe you are the only person who can help me." Poirot leaned forward, his fingers steepled in front of him. "What is it that you require assistance with, madame?" "My name is Isabella Thorpe," she began, her voice steady but tinged with something that hinted at fear. "And I have been entangled in something I cannot control. I fear that I have become involved in a scheme much larger and more dangerous than I ever imagined." Poirot's interest piqued. "Go on, Mademoiselle Thorpe." She sighed heavily, her eyes clouding with a mix of guilt and fear. "It all began when my father, a prominent businessman, made a deal with Lord Pembroke. A business arrangement of sorts. I did not know the full details, but I know it involved rare artifacts, objects of significant value. My father had always been a man of principle, but it was only when he died that I learned just how much he had been drawn into Pembroke's web." Hastings spoke up. "Lord Pembroke has been at the centre of many strange dealings, as we've learned. But what do you have to do with this?" Isabella's gaze dropped to the floor. "It was my father's death that brought me into this. He was found dead under mysterious circumstances, apparently an accident. But I do not believe it was an accident. I think my father was killed because he tried to back out of something. Something to do with Lord Pembroke's collection. My father was trying to get out of a deal he made, but it seems Pembroke did not take kindly to that." Poirot's brow furrowed. A deal with Pembroke involving rare objects? And what kind of deal was it exactly? Isabella's eyes met his, and for the first time she seemed to have some resolve. "I don't know all the specifics, but I believe it had to do with an ancient artifact. An artifact that is not merely valuable, it is dangerous. My father was supposed to help acquire it, and in return, Pembroke promised him influence, power, something far greater than money. But when my father began to question the morality of the arrangement, Pembroke? Well, I believe he had my father silenced." Poirot exchanged a quick glance with Hastings. "An artifact of great power. What exactly was this artifact? Do you know?" Isabella shook her head. "I don't know. I wish I did. All I know is that it was tied to an old legend, something that no one should have tried to acquire in the first place. But my father never told me any more. The only thing I found was a letter he wrote just before his death. It was addressed to someone named the Collector. He said that he feared for his life and that he wanted to stop the deal before it was too late." Poirot's mind was whirring, piecing together the fragments of Isabella's story. This Collector, could it be the same person who has been pulling the strings all along? Isabella nodded slowly. "I think so, but I don't know who this person is. Lord Pembroke is only the public face of it all. There is someone else, someone far more powerful and secretive, who is the true mastermind behind everything." Poirot leaned back in his chair, his fingers tapping thoughtfully on the armrest. "So, your father tried to stop the deal, and now you come to me because you believe Lord Pembroke is still involved?" Isabella's voice dropped to a whisper. "Yes, but I also believe that Pembroke isn't the only danger. There is someone else, someone who has been watching me. I've received letters, cryptic ones, threats, and I've been followed. I'm afraid that whoever is behind this is trying to get to me too." Poirot rose from his chair, his expression hardening. "Monsieur Hastings, prepare yourself. We will need to go immediately to Lord Pembroke's residence. Mademoiselle Thorpe, you will come with us." Isabella shook her head frantically. "No, you don't understand. If they know that I've come to you, they'll kill me. They'll stop at nothing." Poirot placed a hand on her shoulder, his voice firm but comforting. "You are safe, Mademoiselle Thorpe. No harm will come to you while I am involved. But we must act quickly before they can strike first." Hastings looked to Poirot. "What are you thinking, Poirot?" Poirot's eyes gleamed. "I am thinking that we have to move fast. We must confront Lord Pembroke and see where he fits into all of this, and we must uncover who the Collector is before they make their next move." Isabella seemed to relax slightly, though doubt still clouded her eyes. "What should I do?" "Stay close, mademoiselle. Your knowledge of your father's dealings is crucial. We will protect you." As they prepared to leave, Poirot's mind raced with the new information. The pieces were finally starting to come together, but there was one part of the puzzle that remained stubbornly out of place: the true identity of the Collector. Chapter 6. A Face in the Shadows. The fog rolled in thick and fast that evening, shrouding London's streets in a blanket of grey. Poirot and Hastings accompanied Isabella Thorpe through the damp, narrow alleys of the city, their destination clear: Lord Pembroke's estate. It was a grand residence, situated on the outskirts of Mayfair, a mansion that spoke of old money, power, and the insidious workings of a world hidden beneath the surface of polite society. As they neared the estate, Poirot could feel the weight of the investigation pressing down on him. Every piece of the puzzle seemed to be pointing towards Pembroke, but something about the whole affair was still elusive. The true mastermind, the one who orchestrated this web of secrets and lies, remained in the shadows. And the more Poirot thought about it, the more he felt an undeniable sense that the cravat, the red silk cravat, was not just a symbol, but a key to unlocking something far darker. Isabella had been unusually quiet during the walk, her eyes darting nervously as they passed through the damp streets. It was clear that the danger she felt was real, but there was also an unease about her. Something in her posture suggested that she had more to hide than she had let on. "I can feel it, Poirot," she said suddenly, her voice barely a whisper. I think they're watching me." Poirot slowed his pace, glancing around at the shadowed corners of the alley. "They may be, Mademoiselle Thorpe, but you are in safe hands now. You must trust me." Hastings, walking just behind them, glanced nervously at the darkened alleyways. "I don't like this, Poirot. The longer we stay out here, the more it feels like we're walking straight into a trap." Poirot paused for a moment, his sharp eyes scanning the surroundings, before giving a slight nod. "The trap, Hastings, is already set. The question is whether we fall into it or disarm it." As they reached the grand iron gates of Lord Pembroke's estate, a man in a dark suit appeared at the entrance, his posture stiff and his expression impassive. He was a butler, clearly accustomed to receiving high-profile guests. His eyes flicked briefly to Isabella, but he made no move to acknowledge her presence directly. Instead, he turned to Poirot. "Monsieur Poirot," the man said, his voice cool. "Lord Pembroke has been expecting you. Please follow me." The group followed the butler up the long driveway, past the manicured gardens and towards the large double doors that stood open, welcoming them into the lavish interior. The smell of rich wood, polished leather, and expensive perfume filled the air as they stepped inside. The grand chandelier above glittered in the dim light, casting long shadows across the marble floors. Lord Pembroke was standing in the drawing-room, facing the large fireplace, his back to the entrance. He did not turn around as they entered, but his voice was unmistakable. "Ah, Poirot," Lord Pembroke said, his tone full of thinly veiled disdain. "I was wondering when you would finally come. You've taken your time." Poirot studied the man carefully as he approached, his gaze not missing a single detail of Pembroke's stance. There was arrogance in his posture, but also something else, a sense of unease that seemed to seep through his composed exterior. "You are a difficult man to pin down, Lord Pembroke," Poirot replied coolly, his eyes narrowing slightly. "But I am here now, and I trust you will be forthcoming with the information I seek." Pembroke finally turned around, a smirk playing at the corner of his lips. "Forthcoming? I hardly think so, Monsieur Poirot. You seem to think I am at your disposal, but I assure you I have no intention of revealing anything to you or to anyone." Isabella shifted nervously behind Poirot, but the detective held up a hand to silence her. He was fully aware of the tension in the room. Lord Pembroke was hiding something, and Poirot's instincts told him that whatever it was at the heart of the mystery. He had no intention of leaving until he had answers. "I am here for the cravat, Lord Pembroke," Poirot said, his voice steady and unyielding. "The red silk cravat that has been lost to us. You have it, do you not?" Pembroke's eyes flickered just for a moment, before his expression returned to one of practised indifference. "Ah, yes, the cravat. It seems you've been speaking to the wrong people, Poirot. It is not my possession you seek, but rather something far more elusive." Poirot's mind raced as he analysed the man's words. Pembroke's reaction, or lack thereof, spoke volumes. He was trying to divert attention, to make it seem as though the cravat was a mere trinket, rather than the key to something far more significant. "And yet I cannot help but wonder, Lord Pembroke," Poirot continued, his tone gentle but firm, "why would a man with your reputation, a man with so much to lose, be so invested in a simple silk cravat?" Pembroke's gaze turned cold, and for a moment the facade of civility dropped, revealing something darker beneath. "You do not understand, Poirot. There are forces at play here that you could never comprehend. The cravat is merely the beginning. There is far more at stake than you or I." Poirot took a step closer, his eyes never leaving Pembroke's face. "Perhaps it is you who does not understand, my friend. I have seen many men like you in my time. They are driven by power, by their own insecurities, and by their hunger for control. But it is you who does not comprehend the gravity of the situation. There are those who will stop at nothing to protect the secret you hold." Lord Pembroke stiffened, his face growing pale. "You threaten me, Poirot?" "No," Poirot replied softly. "I warn you, you are not the puppet master in this game. You are just another pawn." Pembroke's lips curled into a thin smile, though it lacked any warmth. "We shall see about that, Poirot." Before Poirot could respond, a noise came from the hallway, a low creaking, followed by the sound of footsteps approaching. The butler appeared again, his face more drawn than before. He was holding a silver tray, upon which lay a single object, the red silk cravat. Poirot's heart quickened as he stepped forward. The cravat was unmistakable. The bright crimson fabric glistened in the dim light, its intricate design of swirling patterns and symbols almost hypnotic. It was no mere piece of cloth. It was something far more significant. But the moment Poirot reached for it, he noticed something strange. The cravat, though beautiful, was cold to the touch, unnaturally so, as though it had been exposed to a chill far beyond the temperature of the room. "Why is the cravat cold, Lord Pembroke?" Poirot asked, his voice a thread of suspicion. Pembroke's smirk faltered, but only for an instant. "Perhaps because you have been searching for it for so long, Poirot. And now that you've found it, you must learn to accept the consequences." Poirot studied the cravat closely, his fingers brushing against the smooth fabric. The subtle shiver of something hidden beneath the surface nagged at him. There was something off about this cravat, something that didn't quite fit. "Tell me, Lord Pembroke," Poirot said quietly, "who else has been involved in this affair?" Lord Pembroke's eyes flickered again, but this time Poirot saw the fear behind the mask. Before Pembroke could respond, there was a sharp knock on the door. a man stepped into the room, his features obscured by a wide-brimmed hat. His silhouette was familiar, though it took a moment for Poirot to place him. It was Charles Haverstock. The tension in the room thickened as Haverstock's eyes met Poirot's. "You've come just in time, Poirot," Haverstock said, his voice low. "There's much you need to know, and I believe we need to talk." Chapter 7. The Collector's Shadow. The mood in the drawing-room shifted in an instant. The arrival of Charles Haverstock, a man with a reputation as slippery as an eel, brought a new layer of intrigue to the already tense atmosphere. Poirot stood still, his sharp eyes narrowing as Haverstock made his way further into the room. Behind him, the butler quietly closed the door, leaving the four of them in a room filled with the scent of opulence and suspicion. Haverstock was a tall man, though slightly hunched in a way that suggested he was accustomed to a life of hiding, in plain sight. His suit, though finely tailored, was slightly wrinkled, as if he had been in a hurry. His eyes, dark and calculating, darted from Lord Pembroke to Poirot before settling on Isabella, who was standing behind the detective, her face pale but resolute. "Poirot," Haverstock said, his voice smooth but laced with something more, perhaps impatience, perhaps something darker. "I'm glad you're here. There's much we need to discuss, but I'm afraid time is of the essence." Poirot didn't flinch at Haverstock's directness. "Is there indeed, monsieur? I am listening, but I must warn you. If you think you can deceive me, you will quickly learn that such things do not go unnoticed." Haverstock gave a tight smile, clearly unbothered by Poirot's challenge. "I don't need to deceive you, Poirot. I simply need you to understand the gravity of the situation." Lord Pembroke stepped forward, his usual arrogance replaced by a rare flicker of uncertainty. "Haverstock, you've come here for a reason. What is it you wish to tell us?" The man's gaze flicked briefly to Lord Pembroke before he sighed, running a hand through his dishevelled hair. "I don't wish to be the bearer of bad news, but you're all in far deeper than you realize. The cravat is just the tip of the iceberg. There are far more dangerous forces at work than you can imagine." Poirot's eyes hardened. He could sense that Haverstock was playing some kind of game, but he wasn't ready to let him off the hook. "Monsieur Haverstock, I would appreciate it if you would not waste my time with cryptic statements. You have entered this room for a reason, so let us dispense with the theatrics and speak plainly." Haverstock's lips twisted in a thin smile, and for a moment Poirot caught a flicker of something in his eyes, a glint of fear, perhaps, or guilt. "Very well," Haverstock said, his tone shifting to something more serious. "But know this, there is a man behind all of this, someone you haven't even begun to consider. He is the one who orchestrated everything." Poirot's curiosity piqued. The one who orchestrated the cravat's disappearance? The one who controls Lord Pembroke? "No," Haverstock said, shaking his head. "Not Lord Pembroke. Not any more. You see, Pembroke is merely a pawn in a much larger game. The true mastermind, the collector, is someone far more powerful. He has manipulated Pembroke, Isabella's father, and countless others, pulling the strings from the shadows. Isabella's hand fluttered nervously at her side. "The collector? Who is he? What does he want?" Haverstock's eyes flicked to her. "That's the part we don't understand yet. The collector is a mystery, but I can tell you this. He is not just some eccentric collector of antiques or art. This man has a vision, a very dangerous vision, and he has been using powerful people like Lord Pembroke to make it a reality. Poirot's mind was already whirring, connecting the dots. You are suggesting that the cravat, a simple piece of fabric, is part of a much larger plan. Haverstock nodded, his expression darkening. Yes, the cravat is a symbol, but it is also a key. It's tied to something far older than anyone realizes, something that can give the collector unimaginable power. Your investigation, Poirot, has been heading down the wrong path. You're focusing on the wrong things. Poirot's gaze never left Haverstock's face as he absorbed the man's words. You seem to know an awful lot, monsieur, and yet I find it curious that you've only chosen to reveal this information now, when it is most convenient for you. Haverstock stiffened but quickly recovered. You're right. I haven't been forthcoming, and for that I apologize. But the truth is, I didn't want to get involved. I've been following the collector's actions for years, trying to stay out of his grasp. But now... He trailed off, and for a brief moment something resembling fear flashed across his face. Lord Pembroke, who had been listening intently, spoke up. And what does the collector want with the cravat, Haverstock? Why is it so important? Haverstock looked at him as though he had just asked an obvious question. Because it's part of the collector's collection, of course. The cravat was an heirloom, but it was also a symbol. Whoever possesses it holds a key to a larger mystery, one that the collector believes will give him control over far more than just material wealth. Control over what, precisely? Poirot asked, leaning forward. What is it that the collector truly desires? That, Haverstock said, lowering his voice to a near whisper, is the question. And that's why I came to you, Poirot. I believe the cravat is part of an ancient relic, a relic that can influence people's minds. The collector is obsessed with it. He believes it will give him the ability to control others, to bend them to his will. Isabella's face paled even further. Mind control. Is such a thing even possible? Poirot stood silent for a moment, contemplating Haverstock's words. The notion of controlling someone's mind was not one to be taken lightly, but Poirot had seen stranger things in his time. He had no doubt that the collector was no mere eccentric. He was a man with a purpose, a dangerous purpose. I must admit, Poirot said after a long pause, that I find your story incredible, monsieur. But there is one thing that puzzles me. If the collector is so powerful, why has he allowed us to come this far? Haverstock's lips curled into a rueful smile. That's the crux of it, Poirot. The collector doesn't see you as a threat. Yet, he thinks he's always one step ahead. He believes that by keeping you in the dark, you'll eventually lead him to what he wants. But the truth is, you're playing right into his hands. Then we must act quickly, Poirot said firmly, before it's too late. Lord Pembroke's face tightened. And how do you propose we do that? The collector is everywhere. We can't simply confront him directly. Poirot's gaze sharpened. No, we cannot. But we can start by using what we know. The cravat, the auction, the business deals. These are all pieces of a puzzle. And I believe the key to solving this lies in the people involved. We must uncover who has been working with the collector and why. Hastings, who had been silent up until now, spoke up. And what do we do with the cravat, Poirot? If it's a key to something dangerous, surely we should destroy it. Poirot shook his head. Destroy it? No, Hastings. We must hold on to it, learn more about it. If the collector is after it, then we can use it to our advantage. Isabella, still looking uncertain, glanced at Poirot. But how can we trust that we'll be safe? The collector won't stop until he has what he wants. Poirot's eyes softened as he turned to her. Mademoiselle Thorpe, you are safe with me, but you must understand that the danger is not over. It is only just beginning. The silence in the room grew thick as the weight of Poirot's words sank in. The game had changed. The stakes had been raised. And the true mastermind, the one pulling the strings, was still lurking in the shadows, waiting for the right moment to strike. Poirot's mind raced, calculating his next move. There was no turning back now. They had entered the collector's game, and the only way to win was to outsmart him before it was too late. Chapter 8. A Web of Lies. The afternoon sunlight streamed through the large bay windows of the drawing-room, casting long shadows across the floor as Poirot stood by the fireplace, his back straight, his fingers tapping rhythmically against his chin. The air was heavy with anticipation. Every word that Haverstock had spoken hung in the air, each one a thread that seemed to lead nowhere and everywhere at once. Yet Poirot had learned long ago that when you felt like you were walking in circles, it was often the best time to stop and observe the pattern you were creating. Isabella Thorpe had excused herself earlier, claiming she needed to prepare for a dinner engagement that evening. But Poirot could sense that there was more to her departure than she let on. Her concern for her father had been genuine. But the moment Haverstock had mentioned the collector, a different kind of fear had entered her eyes. A fear that was not just of the unknown, but of something far more personal. Poirot was certain she knew more than she was willing to share. Lord Pembroke, too, had retreated into his usual aloofness. Though he had appeared shaken at first, he was now pacing the room, his hands clasped behind his back, as if pretending that the mystery at hand was something far less dangerous than it truly was. Poirot watched the man for a moment before speaking. "You are troubled, my lord," he said, his voice cutting through the quiet. Pembroke stopped in his tracks and turned to face him, his jaw tight. "I'm not troubled, Poirot. I'm frustrated. We've been chasing shadows, and I don't see how we can continue like this. Haverstock's words don't add up. If the collector is truly behind all of this, why hasn't he made himself known? Why is he hiding in the shadows?" "Because, mon cher, the shadows are where the most dangerous of men operate," Poirot replied, his tone calm, but his eyes sharp. "The collector is not a fool. He is patient. He is waiting for the right moment to strike. And when he does, you will see that every step we've taken, every person we've encountered, has been part of his plan." Pembroke's brow furrowed, but there was a flicker of understanding in his eyes. "I suppose I've been naive, but how do we move forward from here?" Poirot's mind was already racing, connecting the dots between Haverstock's cryptic words, the cravat, and the strange events that had unfolded in the days leading up to the auction. He had a theory, a hypothesis that, if correct, could change everything. "There is one more person we must speak with," Poirot said, his eyes narrowing. "Someone who may hold the final piece of the puzzle." Lord Pembroke raised an eyebrow. "And who would that be?" "Isabella Thorpe," Poirot answered firmly. "She knows more than she's letting on. I believe she has been involved in this affair long before we ever arrived at the auction house." Pembroke's eyes widened, a flash of suspicion crossing his features. "Isabella, you think she's involved in all of this?" Poirot nodded slowly. "She has been in close proximity to the key players in this game. The Cravat, her father, Haverstock, and yet she has remained oddly detached from the investigation. Her departure earlier today was not merely out of concern for her father. No, I believe it was because she has secrets of her own, and I intend to uncover them." A silence fell over the room as the weight of Poirot's words settled in. Lord Pembroke was clearly torn between loyalty to his long-time associate and the uncomfortable possibility that Isabella might not be as innocent as she appeared. "I don't want to believe that," Pembroke muttered, "but I suppose there is no harm in asking her." Poirot gave a small smile, the corners of his lips turning upward. "Mon cher, we are not asking her anything. We are simply observing. If she has information, she will reveal it in time. But if she is hiding something—" Poirot's voice trailed off meaningfully. "We will know." It wasn't long before they made their way to the study where Isabella had retired to. Her presence felt immediately as they entered the room. She was standing by the window, her gaze distant as if she were lost in thought. The moment she heard them enter, she turned to face them, her expression carefully neutral. "Poirot," she said, her voice betraying none of the nervousness that was clearly there. "Lord Pembroke, what can I do for you?" Poirot's eyes studied her carefully, his gaze never wavering. "Mademoiselle Thorpe, I hope we are not interrupting you." Isabella gave a small shake of her head, though her posture seemed a bit too rigid for comfort. "Not at all. I was just thinking." "Thinking," Poirot repeated, his tone soft but probing. "About the cravat, perhaps." Isabella's eyes flickered momentarily, but she quickly masked it with a polite smile. "I've already told you all I know about it, Poirot. There's nothing more I can add." "Ah, but I believe there is, Mademoiselle Thorpe," Poirot countered, stepping closer to her. "You see, I have a theory. A hypothesis that might help us understand the connection between the cravat and the man behind this affair." Euclid's breath hitched ever so slightly, and Poirot noticed her hands tightening at her sides. She was nervous, that much was clear, but there was also a flicker of something else, something she was trying desperately to hide. Lord Pembroke took a step forward. "Isabella, if you know something, now is the time to tell us. We can't afford any more secrets." Isabella's eyes darted between the two men, and for a long moment it seemed as though she might refuse to speak. But then, something in her expression softened, and she sighed. "I never wanted this. I never wanted any of it. But I was born into a world where secrets are currency, where every move I make is watched by people I can never escape, people who want something from me, from my family." Poirot nodded, though he didn't interrupt. He was careful not to rush her. She needed to say this on her own terms. "My father," she continued, her voice faltering slightly, "was involved with people far more dangerous than he ever let on. The cravat, it was never just an heirloom. It was part of something much bigger, something he couldn't escape. And now it's too late." "Too late?" Poirot repeated softly. Too late for what? Isabella's eyes filled with sorrow. Too late to turn back. The collector knows everything, and he won't stop until he has it all. Lord Pembroke's face twisted with confusion and disbelief. The collector? You're saying my father? He's involved with this man? Isabella nodded slowly, her gaze distant. Yes, and I fear that it's only a matter of time before everything we've tried to protect falls apart. Poirot stepped forward, his face a mask of determination. Mademoiselle Thorpe, you have taken the first step, but now you must help us. The collector's plan cannot succeed, not if we act swiftly. Her gaze met his, and for the first time, Isabella seemed to see the weight of the situation for what it truly was. I will help, she whispered, her voice barely audible. But we must be careful. The collector is always watching. Chapter 2. 9. The Unravelling Thread. The tension in the room was palpable. Poirot had seen many cases, but this one was unlike any other. It felt as though they were teetering on the edge of a precipice. Each decision, each conversation, each move, a step closer to either unmasking the truth or plunging deeper into the web spun by the elusive collector. Isabella Thorpe's admission had been a breakthrough, but it was not enough. The cravat, the collector, her father's involvement, all these pieces now seemed like a distant reflection in a dark mirror. There was still something missing, some crucial link that remained stubbornly out of reach. After her confession, Poirot had asked her to stay in the study under the watchful eye of Lord Pembroke, while he ventured alone to one of the few remaining, Leeds, the old auction house where the cravat had first been sold. He had an inkling that the answer lay there, hidden among the dusty old receipts and forgotten records. The auction house was situated on a quiet street in the heart of London, a building that looked every bit as antiquated as the items it sold. The wooden sign above the door creaked slightly in the wind, and the faint smell of old books and polished mahogany filled the air as Poirot entered. Inside, the space was dimly lit, filled with towering shelves stacked with rare collectibles, paintings, and strange artifacts from far-off lands. "Ah, Monsieur Poirot, a pleasure as always," greeted the curator, a portly man in his early 60s with an easy smile. "I assume you've come to inquire about the latest acquisitions?" Poirot smiled politely but shook his head. "No, monsieur. I have come to ask about a particular item that was sold some time ago. A red silk cravat. Do you recall it?" The curator's smile faltered just slightly, enough for Poirot to notice. "Ah, yes. A very peculiar item, I must say. That cravat was part of an estate auction, a rather wealthy collection, if I recall correctly. It was sold to a buyer who wished to remain anonymous." "I see," Poirot said, his mind racing. "And can you tell me who that buyer was?" The curator paused, his fingers tapping nervously against the edge of his desk. "I'm afraid that information is confidential, Monsieur Poirot. We're bound by certain agreements, you understand." Poirot studied the man carefully. "I do understand. However, I believe this cravat was more than just a simple item of clothing. I believe it holds great significance. The buyer, whoever they were, could be very important in my investigation." The curator's face twitched, and Poirot didn't miss the flicker of guilt in his eyes. He was hiding something, and Poirot was determined to find out what. Perhaps, Poirot continued, you would allow me to see the records from that auction, the ones that list the items sold? Reluctantly, the curator nodded. Very well, Monsieur Poirot, but you must understand, we have strict rules. I can only show you what is available to the public record. He led Poirot to a dusty corner of the office where an ancient ledger was kept. The pages were yellowed with age, but the ink was still legible. As Poirot flipped through the pages, he found the entry he was looking for, the sale of the red silk cravat. Beneath it was a name that was not immediately familiar to Poirot, but whose appearance sent a ripple of recognition through his mind. Dr. Charles Everley, Poirot murmured under his breath. The curator stiffened when Poirot read the name aloud. Ah, yes, Dr. Everley, an enigmatic figure, a collector of sorts, though not of the typical variety. I believe he resides near the outskirts of London, in a manor of some repute. A man of private tastes, if you will. Poirot's mind immediately began to piece together the connection. Everley was a name tied to a notorious figure in high society circles, someone whose interests extended far beyond the typical pursuits of wealth and art. He had heard whispers of the man's involvement with secretive fringe groups, those with dangerous ambitions. Merci, monsieur, Poirot said, closing the ledger with a decisive snap. I believe I know where to look next. Leaving the auction house behind, Poirot felt a new sense of urgency. If Dr. Everley was indeed the buyer of the red silk cravat, he would be the key to uncovering the full extent of the collector's plans. Poirot needed to confront him, to see for himself what this man knew, and more importantly, what he was hiding. By the time Poirot arrived at Dr. Everley's manor, the sun was beginning to dip below the horizon, casting long shadows over the imposing stone facade. The manor was situated on a sprawling estate, far removed from the hustle and bustle of the city. It was the kind of place that seemed to invite secrets, and Poirot could sense that this was exactly the kind of environment the collector would find appealing. He was greeted by a butler who seemed to know exactly who Poirot was, though he did not ask questions. The butler's silence was unnerving, and Poirot couldn't help but wonder how many times he had been asked to show a visitor into Dr. Everley's study. The fact that Everley was known for his reclusiveness only deepened the mystery. The study itself was dark, lit only by a few scattered lamps and the dim glow from a dying fire in the hearth. Dr. Everley was a tall, thin man, his face gaunt and pale, his eyes sharp and calculating. He rose from behind an antique desk when Poirot entered, his movements slow and deliberate. "Ah, Hercule Poirot," Dr. Everley said with a thin smile. "I had a feeling you would come." Poirot's eyes narrowed. "It seems my reputation precedes me, Monsieur Everley. I must confess, I am surprised you know of me." "Of course," Everley replied, his smile never fading. "A man of your skill would naturally be interested in such matters. The cravat, for example. I'm sure you have many questions." Poirot didn't hesitate. "The cravat you purchased at auction. It was sold to you under mysterious circumstances. What exactly did you intend to do with it?" Everley's smile grew colder, his eyes glinting with something darker. "I intend to do nothing with it, Monsieur Poirot. It is merely a piece of history, a trinket. However, I am aware of its significance to someone." someone who has far more interest in it than I. Poirot's pulse quickened. Who, monsieur? Who would want such an item, and why? Dr. Everleigh's eyes gleamed with a strange intensity. That is a question only the collector can answer, but I suspect you are closer to the truth than you realize. Poirot's heart skipped a beat. The collector was here, in Everleigh's manor, in the very room with him. It was clear that this was the heart of the mystery. "Tell me everything, monsieur," Poirot demanded, his voice low and unwavering. "What is the collector's plan? What is it that you all seek?" Everleigh's lips parted in an almost amused smile, and for the first time Poirot saw a glimmer of something, fear perhaps, behind his cold exterior. "You think you're ready, Poirot?" Everleigh asked softly, his voice barely a whisper. "You're playing with forces far beyond your comprehension." Poirot's brow furrowed, but his resolve remained firm. "I do not fear the truth, monsieur. I fear only the lies that surround it." Dr. Everleigh's smile faltered slightly, but he said nothing more. It was clear that the answers would not come easily, and yet, as Poirot left the manor that evening, he knew one thing for certain. The game had changed. The collector was closer than ever, and the clock was ticking. Chapter 10. The Crimson Truth. The storm had rolled in by the time Hercule Poirot returned to Pembroke Hall. The wind battered the windows, and thunder cracked ominously overhead, as if the skies themselves sensed the climax nearing. Poirot stepped out of the cab, his coat flaring in the gust, and made his way quickly to the front door. He had seen the face of the puppet master. Now, all that remained was to cut the strings. Inside, Lady Pembroke stood by the hearth, her shawl wrapped tightly around her shoulders. Isabella sat nearby, pale but composed, her hands resting in her lap. Lord Pembroke paced furiously. All heads turned as Poirot entered. "You've been gone for hours," Lord Pembroke barked. "What news? Where were you?" Poirot calmly removed his gloves. "I have returned from Dr. Charles Everleigh's estate." Isabella stiffened. "Everleigh? What has he to do with any of this?" Poirot looked around the room. "Everything, mademoiselle. He is the one who purchased the red silk cravat at auction, and he is the one who has been orchestrating this mystery from the shadows." Lady Pembroke gasped. "But why?" Poirot moved toward the hearth, allowing the fire's warmth to dispel the chill of the storm outside. To understand the why, we must first understand the who. And not merely who bought the cravat, but who designed the entire performance. He turned to Isabella. "You suspected your father of involvement, that he had secrets tied to this collector. But the truth, mademoiselle, is that your father was not the villain. He was a victim, one of many." Isabella blinked. "A victim?" Poirot nodded solemnly. "The collector is not merely an alias. It is a role, assumed by men like Dr. Everleigh. Men with appetites for control and a desire to possess artifacts not just of monetary value, but emotional significance. The cravat was such a piece, not because it was rare, but because of its history." Lord Pembroke, who had poured himself a drink, stopped mid-sip. "History?" "Oui," said Poirot. "It belonged to a man named Antoine Marchand, a minor figure in Napoleonic espionage, but of great personal importance to Everleigh's family. Antoine was Everleigh's ancestor. A traitor, accused and executed with that very cravat around his neck. Dr. Everleigh has spent decades reclaiming and rewriting the past. He believes history can be rewritten if the symbols are recaptured. The cravat was not just a relic, it was a trophy, one he would kill to protect. Lady Pembroke sat, stunned. So it was personal. Highly, Poirot said, but there is more. The cravat was held briefly by your late husband, Lady Pembroke, during his collection years. He attempted to auction it without realizing its significance. Everleigh tracked it, reclaimed it, and, when it was stolen again, decided to flush out the thief by creating a false trail. The letters, the threats, the theatrics, they were meant to bait someone. Poirot looked back at Isabella. That someone, mademoiselle, was you? Me? Isabella stood stunned. But I didn't take the cravat. I only found out about it weeks ago. You didn't steal it, no, said Poirot, but your late fiancé did. A sharp silence fell. Over the room, Poirot continued gently. James Barrett, he discovered the cravat's connection to your father, and believed it proof of his involvement in something sinister. He stole it, hoping to leverage it or expose what he thought was a conspiracy. But he underestimated the collector. Dr. Everleigh had him watched. When James threatened to go public, he was silenced. Tears welled in Isabella's eyes. No, I thought James left me, that he'd disappeared. He was murdered, Poirot said quietly, and his body disposed of. The red silk cravat was later recovered by Everleigh's agents. Lord Pembroke clenched his fists. So what now? The man is a murderer. We arrest him. Poirot held up a hand. Not so quickly. Dr. Everleigh is powerful, well-connected, and meticulous. We have no body, no eyewitness. We need a confession, or a mistake. A knock came at the door. Poirot opened it to reveal Inspector Japp, soaked from the rain but determined. "Got your message, Poirot," Japp said. "You think Everleigh's our man?" Poirot gestured him in. "He is, but we must lure him. He believes he has outwitted us. Let us show him otherwise." 2 days later, the Pembroke Masquerade. Lady Pembroke's annual masquerade ball had always drawn society's elite, and this year was no different. Though beneath the glinting masks and swirling gowns, a darker game was being played. Poirot moved silently through the crowd, his eyes scanning every masked guest. He knew Everleigh would come. He would want to see his victory. The return of the cravat, quietly placed in the Manor's gallery as part of the evening's display, was the bait. Then he saw him. A tall figure in a black half-mask, gloved hands clasped behind his back, staring at the cravat under glass. Poirot approached. "Beautiful, is it not?" Poirot said mildly. Everleigh didn't turn. "It is a symbol of both shame and justice. Funny how time can twist such things." Poirot nodded, but truth remains, no matter how much one wishes to rewrite the past. Everleigh smiled thinly. "Truth is malleable, Monsieur Poirot, to those who hold power." Poirot's tone shifted, but murder is not. You silenced James Barrett, you terrified Isabella, and you toyed with history. Finally, Everleigh turned, mask off, eyes blazing. "Do you think any court will convict me? You have no evidence." Poirot smiled. "But I do. The curator at the auction house is ready to testify. Your personal valet has spoken to Inspector Japp. And tonight, monsieur, you just confessed, in a room wired for sound. Everleigh's mouth opened slightly in disbelief. Japp appeared behind him with 2 constables. You may rewrite your family's history in your mind, Dr. Everleigh, Poirot said, but reality, like a cravat wound too tight, eventually leaves its mark. 3 weeks later, Poirot's apartment Poirot sat contentedly in his armchair, sipping a tisane. The fire crackled softly, and Hastings, who had returned just in time to hear the resolution, shook his head in admiration. Incredible, Poirot! I can never keep up with how that mind of yours works. The cravat, the collector, all of it tied together. Poirot smiled. Mon ami, it is not about brilliance. It is about the little grey cells. They crave order, and once all the threads are untangled, even a red silk one, the pattern reveals itself. He leaned back, utterly at peace. Another case closed, another lie exposed, and the truth, as always, prevailed.